I want to talk about the real 1% of India. And no, I'm not referring to the billionaires or the usual suspects on the rich lists. I'm talking about the real workhorses of this country, the income taxpayers. According to the latest available data, around 7 crore people filed income tax returns last year, but only about 1.5 crore of them paid any non-zero tax. And that is roughly 1% of the Indian population. And this 1%, despite their invisibility in national conversations, are crucial to the future of India. They are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are the salaried class, the small entrepreneurs, the professionals, and the service sector workers who keep this country moving. If you're someone who belongs to this 1%, or if you're aspiring to be a part of it and want to understand how to grow your wealth, manage your finances, or even become a financial advisor yourself, then make sure that you subscribe to the channel and join our Telegram community. This is where we break down the realities, opportunities, and hard truths of personal finance in India for people like you. So who are these people really? Most of them are employed in India's booming but brittle services sector. They are engineers, teachers, doctors, marketing executives, gig workers, and tech professionals. Largely urban, educated, and aged somewhere between late 20s to early 50s. Around 75% of income taxpayers are men and just 25% are women, showing a gendered skew that mirrors our overall labor force participation. These individuals tend to be college educated, often juggling EMI payments on modest homes, used cars, and SIPs in mutual funds. They may not be wealthy, but they are financially literate, aspirational, and they have always played by the rules. This class was shaped by the colonial push for formal education and cemented by the liberalization of the 1990s. It has been the most reliable engine of economic mobility in independent India. But today, this engine is sputtering. The salaried middle class is under pressure, and the signs are all around us. Consumer sentiment is weakening. FMCG companies have reported flat or declining volume growth in multiple quarters. In Q3, for instance, Hindustan Unilever's volume growth was just 2%, and Marico saw a decline in rural demand. The auto sector tells a similar story. Entry-level car sales, which are a strong proxy for middle-class consumption, have been struggling. Maruti Suzuki, the market leader, has consistently reported a drop in small car sales. From FY18 to FY23, sales of its Alto and WagonR models have fallen by nearly 40%. And meanwhile, prices of these vehicles have surged, pushing them further out of reach. And the dream of home ownership? In most urban centers, it has become exactly that, a dream. Housing prices in metros like Bengaluru and Mumbai have risen over 30% in the last 2 years, while incomes have not kept pace. At the same time, inflation is eroding whatever disposable income is left. While the official CPI inflation hovers around 6 to 7%, that number means very little for this cohort. For them, the real inflation lies in a different basket: school fees, rents, health insurance, tolls, and commuting costs, which have all climbed far more aggressively. Try budgeting in any major Indian city on a middle-class salary, and you'll quickly see that their lived inflation is closer to 12 to 15%. And it is not just inflation, it is the taxes too. Income tax, GST, cess, tolls, fuel surcharges, stamp duty, there is extraction at every turn. But what is the return on this investment? The public services, roads, schools, hospitals remain unreliable, forcing people to spend out of pocket for private alternatives. Many are quietly asking themselves if the treadmill they are on is still worth running. What makes this more dangerous is that this class has no political clout. They are scattered, diverse, and form no vote bank. They don't riot and they don't vote as a bloc. As a result, they are easy to ignore. The democratic process does not amplify their concerns. It renders them invisible. And this invisibility creates a silent crisis, a class of people doing everything right but still feeling left behind. These are the people who were supposed to be rising, the backbone of New India. Instead, they are stuck between soaring aspirations and shrinking opportunities. Now, someone might say that India is a poor country. Why should we care about this 1%? And that's a fair question. But here's a nuance. This 1% is the economic bridge between the poor and the rich. It is the class that the poor aspires to join and the one from which the future rich emerges. In its absence, there is no ladder of upward mobility. The gap between rich and poor becomes a canyon, and society without a strong middle class becomes economically brittle, politically unstable, and culturally hollow. In the United States, the post war American dream of home ownership, stable employment, and upward mobility drove decades of growth. In India, we've never really had that moment. And now, just when we were getting close, the bridge is cracking under pressure. This is not just bad news for the 1%, it is a warning for the entire economy. Because when the class that pays the taxes, drives the consumption, and educates the next generation, and saves for retirement, loses hope, it is not just a personal crisis, it is a national one. So, what can be done? For starters, we need to acknowledge the existence of this class and its contribution. Tax slabs need to be indexed to inflation, not arbitrarily, but as a rule. Essential expenses like education, rent, and insurance must be given reasonable deductions or relief. Public services must actually function, so people feel their taxes are buying them something real. Urban housing and transport need immediate reform to remain accessible. And most importantly, the middle class deserves a seat at the policy table. It is not about handouts or populism, it is about protecting the economic flywheel of the nation. A country does not become developed by ignoring its builders. And make no mistake, this 1% has built modern India. Quietly, patiently, honestly. And maybe it's time that we finally heard them.